Hey everyone, it's me, Sean Fennessy, host of The Big Picture, and this is the Nosferatu Syllabus. Usually when there's a big new movie release, privately, I make a list of movies that I want to look at for the first time or maybe revisit to prepare for the new movie. In the case of Nosferatu, this is kind of a no-brainer, right? Because Nosferatu, which is the new film from Robert Eggers that comes to us on Christmas Day, is a remake of a film that is 102 years old. In fact, it is one of the most important movies in movie history. It's one of the signature horror films, maybe even set the template for all horror films. I'm talking about F.W. Murnau's Nosferatu. So because this is a movie that is steeped in movie history, this is perfect for a syllabus. What is a syllabus exactly? It's just a list. It's just a collection of, in the case of a college student, readings you might want to do to prepare for your work. In the case of being a huge fucking movie dork, it's what movies are you going to watch before or after you see the movie Nosferatu, directed by Robert Eggers. So let's do it. Let's do it. Where would we do it? We would do it on my beloved Letterboxd. That's the best place to do it. So let's just start making a list on Letterboxd together. So I'm going to start by just starting where we would naturally start, which is by searching for Nosferatu. Here it is, 1922, directed by F.W. Murnau, starring Max Schreck as the demon, Count Orlok. So what am I going to do? I'm going to add it to a list. I'll create a new list for us. This list will be called Nosferatu Syllabus. Only fitting that this be the first title on our list. There it is. If we want to open it up, we can look at it. Look, there's one movie here. Nosferatu is on our syllabus list. We can't stop there. Should you watch Nosferatu from 1922 before seeing the Eggers film? Maybe. If you want the story spoiled for you, perhaps not, though this is a tale as old as time about a demon in pursuit of a woman. Nevertheless, we should watch some other films. What other films should we watch? Well, Nosferatu is a critical work in German Expressionism. And what is German Expressionism? It's an era in filmmaking history that uses light and shadow and outsized imagery and emotionality to convey fear and desire and confusion in a complex state, obviously in Germany around the time of Expressionism in cinema. It's a post-war period and an incredibly complicated time in that country. And some of the films that were made in that period are representative of the national state. Some of it, the filmmakers who are riffing on a lack of cinema history, who are inventing cinema history using the tools of painters and sculptors and the lighting technicians who helped to shape the modern cinema visual dialogue. So let's go with The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, the Robert Wien film, which I think is one of the most signature examples of German Expressionism. Let's search for that film here. There it is. Very simple, starring Werner Kraut and Konrad Veidt. We will add that movie to our Nosferatu syllabus. The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari is there. What about films that were meeting points between the progress of horror and thriller filmmaking with the influence of German Expressionism? The first movie I thought of is The Lodger. The full title of The Lodger is The Lodger, A Story of the London Fog. This is arguably the first Alfred Hitchcock masterpiece, a film made while he was still living in England. And The Lodger is a damn creepy movie. I'll tell you a funny story about The Lodger. I saw The Lodger in part when I went to go visit James Mangold in his office on the Fox lot. And in his office, in the waiting area, there's always a movie playing. And every day there's a new movie playing. And there's a mini marquee displaying the title. And The Lodger was showing on the day I was interviewing him for Ford versus Ferrari. And I thought that was a very odd choice for him given that period of time. But you know what? It just means that James Mangold is an appreciator of cinema, which is something I think we already knew. There's The Lodger. We're going to add that movie to our list. Here it is, onto the syllabus. And there it goes. We've got 3 films. They're all from the 1920s. Should we leave the 20s? Should we add any more films from the 20s? I don't think so. Let's go to 1931. Something important happens in 1931. The Bram Stoker novel Dracula is finally adapted by Hollywood, by Universal Studios. And Todd Browning, the great director behind Freaks, takes on the adaptation. They cast Bela Lugosi, and he, in incredibly memorable fashion, embodies Stoker's villainous vampire. Nosferatu is not Dracula, and yet he is. That's a movie that's been made without the rights to the Stoker novel, but that is trying to embody huge aspects of the Stoker novel The Dracula from Hollywood, while not a perfect representation of the Stoker novel, for example, there's entire stretches of the novel that are not reflected. It's an epistolary novel, and so we don't see the perspective of the letters that are written throughout the novel. But man, it's a damn good representation of the sexy, insidious, syphilitic, metaphorical idea of vampires and Dracula. And it's a forever movie in Hollywood history, and so we got to add it to our syllabus. So Dracula's going on. What else about Dracula? I was trying to think of what are some other good fits vampire-wise to match up with what Nosferatu has to offer, which is a classic gothic horror story with incredible technique and characterization and amazing craft in the filmmaking. I'm not sure if the Hammer films are necessarily all of those things, but some of them are. Hammer, which was a London studio that produced a great many horror movies in the 60s and 70s, made 9 Dracula films. My favorite of those films is called Dracula Has Risen from the Grave. It's from 1968. It's directed by Freddie Francis. Freddie Francis, film scholars and nerds may know as an incredible cinematographer who worked with Jack Cardiff and Jack Clayton and eventually was a cinematographer for David Lynch later in his career. He shot The Elephant Man and Dune and a couple of other films. I think The Straight Story as well. And his Dracula movie, it's the 4th in the Hammer Dracula series. It stars, as they all do, Christopher Lee as Dracula. He's not quite Bela Lugosi in the history of movie vampires, but he's pretty close. And this one is pretty good and pretty nifty and a little bit sexy and a little bit scary and a little bit silly. And it's one that I've come to admire. So let's just do, for those of you who are looking to bone up on mid-20th century Dracula representation, we'll do Dracula Has Risen from the Grave. When you look at the Eggers movie, you can see some of that stuff. You can see some of the influence of those movies. I would not say an overwhelming influence, but just to get you in the right mood, the right mind state, we'll add it to our syllabus here. Okay, speaking of gothic horror, I figure we should probably have a little bit of representation of films that are not quite vampire inflected, but that represent or inspired some of the ambient anxiety and doom that exists in Orlok's castle in the Nosferatu remake. So I thought of the movie The Innocents from 1961, which is a Jack Clayton movie that is an adaptation of Henry James's Turn of the Screw that, as you look at my Letterboxd, you'll see I've already seen and logged and hearted, and I've given it 5 stars. I think this is one of the greatest films in the 1960s. I think it's one of the greatest British films ever made. Deborah Carr and Peter Wingard and Megs Jenkins are the star of this movie. Michael Redgrave as well. It's about a young governess who takes care of 2 kids, and there is a sense that there's something wrong with the house, with the kids. There's a possession of some kind going on. This is a simply astonishingly beautiful movie, and if you have not seen it, I think it has a bit in common with Nosferatu. Not quite as demon forward, not quite as ghoulish, but that sense of quiet, aching fear is at the center of The Innocents. So let's add this one to our list. There we go. Okay, now we're cooking with gas. We've got a lot of films. We've added some Dracula films. We've added a ghost story of a kind. Why not go back to Nosferatu? Because that's what Werner Herzog did. In 1979, really at the height of his powers, in the midst of a glory period for him as a director, he went and made a remake of a sort of Nosferatu with his longtime companion on screen, Klaus Kinski, the actor that he worked with many, many times. There's an incredible documentary about Kinski and Herzog's relationship called My Best Fiend. And some of the best sequences in that movie are from their work together on Nosferatu the Vampire, Vampyre. This film also stars Isabelle Gianni, and it's a similar story. It's about a real estate agent who goes to a castle in the Carpathian Mountains to close a deal on a piece of property in Germany, and a count's going to come down and live in Germany, and maybe he's going to meet some guy's wife that he bought a piece of property from. Seems simple enough. In this case, it is more ghoulish, a little bit less scary to me than the 1922 version, but a little bit more metaphorically flexible for the fear of bodily contacts and disease cultures that I think were rising in Europe and in America at that time. A lot of people see this movie as like a real presaging of the AIDS crisis, which I think is an interesting reading. It's also a traditional classic vampire tale. So let's add this one to our list as well. Do you want to watch both Nosferatu versions before you see the original, the new remake? I'm not totally sure. It's a decision you have to make for yourself. It is one that I made when I went and watched the movie. Speaking of vampires, Bram Stoker's Dracula needs to be here. Bram Stoker's Dracula, arguably the greatest adaptation of Dracula, directed by Francis Ford Coppola, a movie that I talked about a bit on our Francis Ford Coppola Hall of Fame episode. Gary Oldman appears as Dracula in this film. It also stars Winona Ryder, Anthony Hopkins, Keanu Reeves, a number of others. Here you can see on my Letterboxd that I've given this film 4.5 stars. Did I underrate this one? Maybe I did. Maybe I didn't. Let's add it to the list. You got to watch this one. This is an amazing movie. What else is on my list? Well, here's an interesting thing. There was an interesting movie in 2000 called Shadow of the Vampire. It is about the making of F.W. Murnau's Nosferatu. The premise of the movie is, what if Max Schreck, the actor who portrayed Nosferatu in that film, was actually a vampire? And in fact, the director convinced a real-life vampire to appear and to render this terrifying creature in an almost documentary-like fashion. And what would it be like to be on the movie set of a movie being made with a real vampire? This movie stars John Malkovich and Willem Dafoe. Malkovich is Murnau, and Willem Dafoe is Schreck. And this movie is a comedy. It's not really a horror movie. It's not a drama. It's just straight up played for laughs. And Willem Dafoe, who was one of the stars of Eggers' Nosferatu, is absolutely hilarious in this movie as Schreck, as the demon, as a man who thinks at least that he is a vampire. So we're going to add Shadow of the Vampire. I really like this movie. It's a little bit forgotten by time. Okay, there's Shadow of the Vampire. Do you guys ever change the way that the poster looks on your Letterboxd? This is something I like to do. Let's change the poster so that it more closely resembles. Oh yeah, that looks like, is that the Italian version of the poster? Yeah, let's do that. Look at this. Oh yeah. Le Sombro del Vampiro. That's what I'm talking about. Let's add Il Sombro del Vampiro to our Nosferatu syllabus. Fantastic. This has got to be one of the geekiest things I've ever done. Just a few more movies that I'm going to add to our syllabus here, guys. The next one is a really obvious one. It's called The Witch. This is Robert Eggers' first feature directorial film, and it's the one that is closest, I think, in his filmography to Nosferatu. It stars Anya Taylor-Joy memorably as a young woman who becomes separated by her family, who may or may not be being kind of tortured in a way and ultimately captured by a witch living in a forest after their family's been cast out of their community. Amazing performance by Anya Taylor-Joy, incredible preview of the level of skill that Eggers brings to every film, the way that he is able to fully realize his vision for movies. It's the first time that he has worked with, I'll point out a triumvirate of people that he has recurred working with every time he's made a movie, but editor Louise Ford, costume designer Linda Muir, cinematographer Jaron Blaschke, all of whom are incredible artisans and have worked on all 4 of his movies. So we got to do The Witch. You've probably seen The Witch. Maybe you want to revisit it, because I think that sense of dread that this movie has, and the sense of the old world order, and looking back on the ancientness of religion and the occult and where they may or may not intersect, is such a huge part of his interest in the Nosferatu story as well. When you see the movie, you'll see that there's just a lot of detail in the film that we maybe haven't seen in vampire movies before, but that is based in a kind of historical fact mythology, I'll put it. So let's just make sure that we add The Witch. I love to make a list. Can I tell you guys? Aren't lists wonderful? Don't they help us organize and feel more calm? I feel calm right now. Thanks for being here with me. 2 more movies. How about Hagazusa? Show of hands. How many people have seen Hagazusa? No? It's directed by Lucas Feigelfeld. It's a movie about an orphan who grows up to be a marked woman in the 15th century. And it's another movie that is steeped in ancient superstitions and mythologies and is genuinely chilling. So let's find Hagazusa. I guess it was released here in 2017, this film. I thought it was 2015. This is an amazing movie. See, which of my mutuals have seen this film? Oh yeah, there's my friend Elric Kane from the Pure Cinema podcast. He gave it 3.5 stars. It's a great recommendation. Elric is to be trusted in these matters. Let's add it to our Nosferatu syllabus, Hagazusa. This film also takes place in the Carpathian Mountains, just like our film Nosferatu. Okay, one more. I thought I would add Crimson Peak. Crimson Peak is directed, of course, by Guillermo del Toro. And Crimson Peak is a really interesting work in that it feels as though it did not happen, even though Guillermo del Toro is a hugely celebrated filmmaker and thinker about movies. And after I saw my screening of Nosferatu, there was a Q&A in which del Toro interviewed Eggers about his intentions, his relationship with the occult, and the history of vampires. And this was two incredible minds who spent way too much time thinking about this stuff, exploring each other's histories. Crimson Peak is a really fun movie that's in conversation with a bunch of the movies that I've listed here, but that doesn't have a huge reputation. Mia Wasikowska, Jessica Chastain, Tom Hiddleston, Charlie Hunnam, really good cast. It is a movie set in a castle, a lot of candlelight, a lot of dread, ghostly images, fascinating payoff in the ending. I really like the ending of this movie. There's a great Arrow Blu-ray edition if you're interested in owning it at home. And I think it needs a second look culturally. And it has a little bit of a relationship to some of the storytelling in Nosferatu. So I wanted to add Crimson Peak as well. So we'll add that. And then maybe should we look at our list? Let's look at our list. Very simple. Just go to lists. What do we got? The Nosferatu. So that's 12 films that I've got for you. I made it in real time and I've already got 2 likes. I just published this list. How long did this take? 10 minutes? In 10 minutes, I've acquired 2 likes. This is the power of Letterboxd, the internet, list making. And if you love movies, check out Nosferatu. We talked about it in depth on the Big Picture podcast. Me, Chris Ryan, Rob Mahoney. I also have a long conversation with Eggers about how and why he made this movie. Please enjoy these films and please enjoy Nosferatu. We'll see you next time.